Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Strife's Sanctum. My name is Citizen Strife, and this week's review is going to be about a game that kind of caught me a little by surprise, even though I knew kind of going in what to expect. And that is Master Detective's Archives Rain Code. Now, the reason I say it was better than I expected, yet also exactly what I expected, was I knew going in, and I'd probably like it, given that the people who made it previously had made Danganronpa. So, the musicians, the writer, visual style, all of that stuff. So, the writer is Kazutaka Kodaka. Basically, anybody who's played any of the Danganronpa games kind of knows what to expect. The real difference here is they went for a 3D environment this time instead of 2D characters on a 3D environment. You know, most like the early Zero Escape games. And to an extent, the Somnium Files, which is still 3D, but until you get to the Somnium sections, there's not 3D. So it's very similar in that regard. So they took games that were 2D early on due to budget constraints and whatever, and then eventually morphed into something where you have kind of free movement. But all the hallmarks are there. It is slightly different because it isn't following the Danganronpa story or anything like that. It's its own new thing. And I believe the benefit is that by calling it Master Detective Archives, they don't have to strictly follow a premise. They can have a new story and new characters and not have to follow the same chronology and all that junk. They can be self-contained stories. They can bring back people at their leisure and do what they need to do the way they need to do it. But they're not tied down to the franchise if they don't have to be. Because if Raincoat succeeds, which by and large it's sold okay for being a budget title, the idea could be, all right, we told this story. Let's tell some different stuff. Let's, revamp things as best we can from game to game, or we can change it up. By being Master Detective Archives, you have the overarching structure, but then you just go in different directions wherever you need to. You don't need the same stuff. But a lot of the Danganronpa hallmarks, the pink blood, people with crazy superpowers that are called special talents, essentially. Same idea. So a lot of the similar things, a lot of the similar story beats, a lot of the ways you actually do things are the same, but slightly changed to fit the narrative structure of a detective novel as opposed to a murder mystery in a school or wherever the setting of Danganronpa was at the time. So there is some benefits there. Of course, what really is going to help Rain Code live or die is, are you invested in the characters that when shit goes south, things do matter? And something they've struggled with, and I would say a lot of things struggle with, is main characters. Because I am sick to death of main characters that are just there being boilerplate, boring idiots. There is a storyline reason, and I'm not going to get into. This is a non-spoiler review. But suffice it to say, there is a reason this game succeeds and is not the main character. He goes through a story later, and you see him develop as, oh my god, this is tragic and shit. But he, as a person, is very just there. He's a dork face, but he talks, And I've said dork face before. The well-meaning, but kind of namby-pamby, those types of protagonists. That's our main character, Yuma Cocohead. In the long line of Edge Mavericks, as far as stupid-ass names I can't believe they put as main characters. Note, I am not saying just because his name is stupid that this game sucks. No, but it doesn't help. So, Yuma Cocohead, voiced by Lucien Dodge, who was, I think, Victor in Bravely Default. A lot of the actors here, unless I specifically have said, they've been from something, this is, new. things. I had to look them up, and I give the game credit for trying out actors that have been fairly new, within the last 3 to 5 years, mixing in some names that have been around for more than a decade. So it's nice to hear different people and different characters here and there. But Lucien Dodge is Yuma Cocohead. He plays him exactly like you'd expect a teenage protagonist of an anime to be. If he's not moody and annoying and a pissed off loner, he's the namby-pamby, what the fuck, I'm trying to, I have no personality, I have absolutely nothing to give, and to be fair, in this game's credit, they are playing him that way. Unlike, say, a Terra from Final Fantasy VI, who everybody knows has some special powers and some shit, Yuma is a trainee. He is a detective in training, but he's stupid and has amnesia, because that's a trope. And he has nothing to go on. And he's dumped on the Amaterasu Express, this railway train that is automatic. There's no real people outside of some other detectives, because they are from the World Detective Organization, and they're transported to Kanai Ward. So the first chapter is them going about. So they meet up and shit happens, and you get introduced to the real star of the show and the real reason to play this game, Shinigami. And Shinigami is amazing. So she's voiced... this is kind of a Middle Eastern or Indian name. I'm going to get this totally wrong. But Anjali Kunapaneni. You can see why I had a bit of trouble. Minor roles here and there. This is the one that I know her most from, if I was to hazard a guess. Like I said, a lot of this is going to happen. But Shinigami is a ghost. So apparently, Yuma, unbeknownst to him, made a contract with Shinigami. And she is going to help train him. She is this game's Monokuma. And again, you need that sort of character who is very blasé and funny and all that junk to manage to overshoot the most boring, bland piece of milk toast you can think of. So that's what happens. She's very boisterous. She's very loud. She keeps saying mysterful. She barfs up stuff, brightly colored things, and will comment about, oh, you don't want it coming out of my other end, I'm sure. It's just stuff. She'll say things like, oh god, I'm so horny for mysteries, master. I'm like, yeesh. So yeah, it's a mature rated game. But again, it's very like bouncy and cheerful, and she's got big boobs because ghost girls can do that, I guess. But whatever. She's a ghost girl of some weird description. She's considered a death god. So her first form is the plushie form, where she's going to sell a lot of plushies. Just a floating ghost, nothing fancy, kind of looks like Yokai Watch ghosts in a way, just floating around doing stuff. That's why it's very similar to Monokuma without the homicidal tendencies, because she doesn't kill people, she reaps souls, sort of. It's Yuma's job to reap souls. It's a weird conundrum. So she's going to help him solve mysteries, because her job is to solve the mysteries and reap souls of people who were involved. And, it becomes a sort of morality play, as like, am I killing them, or is the mystery labyrinth of some description killing them? The mystery labyrinth in this case is essentially the Persona 5 metaverse, or the TV world, for a lack of better term. The concept is, you've got your Danganronpa investigation phase, where you're doing the story, it's playing out as things are going on, and somebody dies. Usually. And as that's happening, you have to investigate the crime scene. You have to use power sets, whether they're from Yuma or from other people, and figure out what the fuck's going on and who did what. And then when you've done with that, you don't go to a trial room. You go to what is known as a mystery labyrinth. The mystery labyrinth is, like I said, essentially a stripped down metaverse. metaverse palace. So instead of a super long dungeon, you have kind of these corridors and maze-like things. It's very streamlined, so it's very visual novel. You don't really have much in the way of open world access in a Mystery Labyrinth. It's a lot of straight, go here, do this thing, answer these questions, do this thing. And that's kind of beneficial because it's balanced out by side quests that are, you're given a little bit of free reign to roam a city to do that sort of thing, and I'll get into that later. But as Yuma's going along, these people that are trying to catch him for whatever reason, whether they're from Amaterasu Corp, which is the rival of the detectives, or just other people in general that he meets, become these mystery phantoms. And these mystery phantoms are, manifestations of inner turmoil or deep thoughts and little things like that. They are essentially the antagonists of the pieces. So they're self-contained in most cases. So there is an overarching story and villains here and there. By and large, they are separated into their own chapters, though, so it stays very episodic, which does work in the game's favor. So you do these self-contained mysteries, and then you do these little side quest mysteries on the side to get points to do the thing. And the main battle mechanic, if you would call it that, is the reasoning deathmatch. So the guy's standing there, and he's throwing, essentially, a different variation of the trial mechanic from Danganronpa at you. So instead of doing it as a group, you're doing it with you and Shinigami and anybody who might be helping you at the time. So you have to kind of weave in and out with the left and right and up and down buttons. Find the one that you can kind of gauge is, okay, this doesn't add up. Like a Phoenix Wright. It's, Danganronpa's Phoenix Wright based statement deduction kind of game. You swipe at it with a solution blade, which comes from Shinigami in a very strange interpretive dance, and it comes out of her mouth, literally. So yes, he gets this solution blade that only works on mysteries and lies and deceit, and then she barfs up these things called solution keys, literally barfs them up in these bright, beautiful colored lights. I don't know if they smell or not. It's weird, they don't mention it, but he takes these clues that you gain in the investigation phase. So, a locked door. Why was this locked? It seems like there are scratch marks on the wall, or stuff like that. Or this key is missing. Where did the key go? Or you use somebody's power and you learn that, okay, that doesn't look right. That wasn't there before. So you take whatever you find, and as the person is chucking these statements in order to screw up your argument, you can kind of shoot out your own, use your blade to shoot out and attack those statements with different things. So you have to deduce which statement works on what thing. So there is a penalty for fucking up a little bit, but they do the same thing with Danganronpa and Phoenix Wright, where they revolve the statements over and over again. So you get, if it takes you 2 or 3 tries to get it right, it'll take you 2 or 3 tries to get it right, but you'll start getting a feel for it. There is a stats-based mechanic or a skill tree. It doesn't play into it too much. I'd say having more HP to avoid dying is probably the more important thing than actually getting rid of solution keys and junk, because the game's honestly not that difficult. It's doing enough to get you where you need to go, because the reasoning death matches will happen like 3 to 5 times per chapter, and you gotta keep going, and doing a thing. They do another, which is called a Shinigami puzzle, which Shinigami goes on a beach, and she's hiding in a barrel, and it's spinning, and it has these letters, and you're supposed to match the letters to make a word to fill whatever blank statement she's making. And of course, when you break all the right letters in the right order, you get a picture of Shinigami in a beach in a swimsuit, because of course it's an anime-based game. What were they thinking? Not having a girl in a swimsuit? Sure. But yeah, that's the thing. Danganronpa had mini games that sucked, and Raincode's kind of the same way. The gameplay is not ever been Danganronpa's strong suit. It does enough to give you something to do, but they're trying to tell you a story. So this is a visual novel, right? It's giving you something to do as a player while you're letting the story play out. So if that's not the kind of game you're in for, you may not get into this. But still, you got stuff going on. But you do that. Other times, there'll be instances where they're recreating crime scenes and you spot the difference, or you spot a thing that could be a new clue that you didn't see before. You also finish off with one thing I do like and a second thing that I don't. It's called it's the Death God Shinigami Fort Scenes. The idea is that you've cornered some guy at the end of the mystery lab. So you've done all these, like, you chose which path goes where and which one's the truth and which one's the lie, and you do these cool things. And then you race after the guy, and he's guy or girl, and they're cornered, and you, like, kick a giant ball, or you run through a brick wall, and you keep hitting with solution keys, and you do the thing, and they're gone. And you've reasoned their statements, and you've done the thing, and that's great. Something of hope that they've patched into the game ever since I played it was something known as the deduction denouement. One of the game's major flaws is the mysteries themselves are pretty self-explanatory. Nothing is left to chance. I'm not saying it's baby games for babies, but at the same time, the game makes it pretty obvious what it wants you to do when you see it. Or you can kind of guess where the story is going to go, even though it does have some weird twists here and there. You know, the self-contained mysteries going on and on are going to be things that, oh, okay, I can see where this is going. I need to put this thing in this part, and then this part goes in this part, and then this thing. This is the story they're trying to tell me. Got it, you know, in your head. But the game is very deliberate about it. It is making absolutely sure, kind of in the same way that Phoenix Wright matter-of-factly tells you, did you do the thing good to put the thing in the thing? They're making absolutely sure, what thing do you remember about the thing that we showed you makes sense for this part of the story? Have you pieced it all together in your head? Now go. The way they do that, by recapping it, is called the deduction denouement. At the end of the thing, you have these, like, series of, you know, comic book panels. I haven't played Danganronpa in a while, so I forget if that's the same way they did it there. But you piece together all of the stuff, and the story is retold in these little comic book things. And then it spends about 5 minutes having Shinigami and Yuma talking about the story again. So you've lived through it, you've done the thing, you know the story, you've pieced together the story, and then they're retelling the story again. It's a bit overkill. So hopefully they patched it to where if you get to the end of the denouement part where you do it as a gameplay aspect, you don't have to live through the story again. I understand what they're going for. They're trying to tell you the story as it happened, but it's almost like explaining a magic trick. Because if you explain a joke or you explain a magic trick, the joy of it kind of goes away. And that's fine if you're a magician or a detective, whatever, but it really kind of drags the game a little bit. So again, I played it when it first came out, so hopefully they've got patches and things. I'm sure the game's not so bad about it. It just feels very deliberate and very forced. So that is one thing I will knock it for. But I still enjoy the characters enough that I'm like, okay, well, I'm liking what they're going for. And again, it's sort of a morality play of, okay, I've found these people and these mysteries, and they've killed people, so I'm allowed to reap their souls because they've been, you know, causing problems, whether for good or for bad reasons. Is Yuma someone allowed to kill somebody via Shinigami? Does that still give him blood on his hands? That sort of thing. So he is still kind of dealing with emotional traumas and junk. But you do the battle system and the stuff and whatever on the Amaterasu Express, and then you get introduced to the other main characters. You got Chief Yako Furio, voiced by Kaiji Tang, who Ichiban in Like a Dragon. 8th game's coming out in January. Fucking buy it. That game is amazing, and I'm sure the 8th game is going to be great too. I knew that the Kazuma Kiryu spin-off, I think Gaiden is coming out. The Man with No Name or something is also out too. I'm like, Yakuza is great. Anyway, but Tang is voicing Ichiban Kasuga. He voices Yako Furio here. He's a bit of a goofball, but well-meaning. So he leads this branch of the World Detective Organization. He's inside Kanai Ward, which is this very closed-off, isolated city. It's raining all the time. People don't understand why it rains all the time. It just is. They just say, okay, Amaterasu Corporation's taken over. There's nothing we can do about it. So we're just living in this rainy city of crap. The benefit of the city, though, and this is something I wanted to bring up, was I'd played Final Fantasy 16 before I played this. And I want to stress this. Final Fantasy 16 looks and plays and feels better. It's got a bigger budget. It looks way glossier. Rain Code looks better. And what I mean by that is the style. Because Persona 5, and to a lesser extent Persona 4, live and die via their style. Danganronpa, to an extent, lives on style because it's trying to do a thing. There are some games that are deliberately trying to be very dour and dank and bleh, and just not fun to look at. That was a stylistic choice that, say, Final Fantasy 16 made. It has all the glossy look and the amazing battle animations. The people look amazing. It's shitty to look at. It's a medieval setting. There's nothing interesting about it. There's marshes, there's bogs, there's fog, there's, castles and, side streets. It looks like a medieval setting. You can't fuck that up, but it's still kind of boring. Raincoat, on the other hand, has much less of a budget, much less to work with, but is going for that Persona 5 style over substance kind of thing, where it is very neon lit. It is very colorful. The rain effects aren't the most amazing, but it adds to the ambiance of the city. It's this cloying, claustrophobic, really weird setting. This noir 80s cyberpunk kind of thing that they're going for. It is steeped in bright colors despite the drab atmosphere. The pink blood from Danganronpa makes a comeback. So it's very bright in spots. They balance out a lot of the... And a part of it is the anime aesthetic. It's going for the anime aesthetic, the pop aesthetic of anime. It's very obvious. A lot of the characters have, gray hair and whatnot, and very bleh skin tones. But the environments, especially the mystery labyrinths, even though those get a bit boring and bland after a while, they look like kaleidoscopic imagery. So they keep changing the color schemes and looking cool and stuff. People who have bright hair and bright eyes and whatever, those pop out the screen because a lot of stuff looks gray. But the city itself, a lot of pinks, a lot of bright purples, a lot of yellows. It's very bright. But it's not the intense brightness. But it just feels like it's a lived-in place that does have a little bit of color to it. And color makes a huge difference, even if you're trying to tell a darkened story. Shinigami is all this purple junk, and then when she turns into her normal self, she's got a bright, color scheme, but then her outfit is pure black. But it flows. She's able to kind of float, and her frilly ribbons and shit, and her horns go everywhere. So it needs to be bright where it needs to be bright. You can tell a story with style to mask some of your budgetary constraints and whatever, and that's what they're going for, and that's why I prefer this game. Again, I'm not saying Final Fantasy 16 is wrong. I'm saying they were going for a style, and this was not really all that exciting. It's the difference of saying what a Final Fantasy 16. I would have said the same thing about comparing it to Chrono Cross, because Chrono Cross has a lot of bright colors and beach imagery and a lot of ships and going out to sea. It looks lovely. Legend of Mana. It looks like a freaking storybook. The Mana games are spectacular. It's the same idea, right? So even though like I'd played Final Fantasy 16 and liked it, Rain Code came right after it, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm liking this a lot more because it looks more colorful to me. That's where I'm going with that. So keep that in mind. The city looks, for its faults, and its drab atmosphere that they're going for still looks very nice and colorful. And if you're into the cyberpunk 80s kind of vibe, you can fit right in with it because that's what they're kind of evoking. Down and dirty, gritty part of Japan, but in this kind of weird noir cyberpunkish thing. Anyway, so Chief Yakufurio brings him in, and he meets the other main characters, and they are varying degrees of quality. So the chapters are broken into different chapters. I'm not going to give away what the chapters are, but I will give up who the main characters of those chapters are. So the first chapter is Halara Nightmares chapter. And Halara Nightmare is voiced by Amber Lee Connors, who was Scarlet in Final Fantasy VII Remake. Interesting there, because she's played... And again, there's a joke where, I guess, transgender or non-binary, and like Yuma is always... Like, Shinigami's always bring it up. It doesn't mean anything. It's like, Halara looks female, she sounds female... At most, non-binary, but Shinigami's always like laughing at Yuma's like, oh, do you like her a lot? And I'm like, well, yes, she's a kick-ass lady or man or whatever the fuck. It doesn't really matter. But Halara is a gambler. She likes cats, and she just has this cool thing where she's like nonchalant about any situation which requires beating the shit out of people, but it costs you a lot. Essentially bounty hunting. She takes her detective skills seriously, and her detective skill is, I believe, post-cognition. The way it works is any crime scene, if you're able to see as it happened through the eye view of the first person that saw the crime scene. So the crime's already happened, but you can still gather clues that may have been shifted around in a different setting or a different thing by peering into the eyes of the first witness. How Yuma gets involved is he has this thing known as coalescence. So as he's able to grasp hands, he's able to share that skill. So he's able to see Halara's post-cognition, and vice versa for other characters. The counterpoint of that is the first person the first or last person he grasps hands with gets to venture into the mystery labyrinth. They don't remember certain things about it, but they're able to at least supervise and aid in the mystery labyrinths while Yuma's doing the main stuff. So, say Halara's helping out with the investigation, she can join in the mystery labyrinth as a sort of support character for that chapter. Second chapter, the most annoying one. It's a cool one because the first chapter is about a case of people getting shot by nails and having driven nails into their body and bleeding out. The second one is about a murder spree at a school, an all-girls school. So the main support character for that is Desahiko Thunderbolt, voiced by Koei Dao. And I hate Desahiko a lot. If you've ever played Persona 4 and ever thought that Teddy couldn't shut the fuck up about girls and scoring with hot studs and all that, dial that down, amp that up, or dilute it into its most purest form, make it like every second or third sentence, and never shut the fuck up. That's Desahiko. I hate this character. I hate his chapter because I want to like him because it introduces another character known as Kurumi, who ends up sort of, but not really, but also sort of, yeah, Yuma's love interest. She's voiced by Lisa Raymold, who was Turi in Ascendance of a Bookworm. I didn't even recognize it until I saw the name. I was like, oh yeah, it was her. But Kurumi is it's just like classmate of some people who are being murdered, and is trying to investigate because Amaterasu's covering it up. That's kind of the main thing going on. So Kurumi meets Desuhiko and Yuma. Yuma has to disguise himself via Desuhiko's disguise kit and, voice changer. So Desuhiko's useful skill, other than his personality and his annoying penchant for thinking he's a lot better than he actually is and trying to fucking flirt with anyone who has a pulse, he can change his look to be anybody he's looking at. He can change his voice and his mannerisms and his walk. So he's got this giant bag that has like every fucking skill. It's the D&D disguise kit on steroids. So he goes into the school, they do that thing, they go in that. Kurumi is an informant. So she acts as a person to tell you about the main overarching plot and then stay in the plot line for the remainder of the game. She tells you about something known as homunculi research. And throughout the game, you start learning about homunculi and how that how that impacts the rest of the thing. So while the side stories are going on, the main chapter stories, you're getting more information. And in chapter 5, which we'll get to, that whole mystery gets wrapped up eventually. But chapter 3 changes again. It starts being about a revolution. So people that are hating against Amaterasu Corporation are, trying to do peaceful protests. You meet a different variety of weirdos with weird powers, and you're trying to help them deal with Amaterasu Corporation. And the way you get help is with Fujiko Clockford, and voiced by Xanthi Wynn. And Fubiki's whole thing is she can turn back time. She can turn back to a certain extent, but it causes fatigue. The way this manifests in game is a bunch of QuickTime events. Oh boy, that's so good! QuickTime events. In a visual novel, it's not so bad, unless you're the Somnium Files and your version of QuickTime events can suck a big fat dick. It's harmless. But it's kind of silly that that's how that manifests in a gameplay sense. But in story, she's able to turn back time to a certain amount. Nobody else except her knows it happened. Though you can use coalescence to experience it yourself. So it ends up becoming Yuma is in charge of Fubuki doing her thing, at least for a few segments while they're trying to get away, because there are weird bombs and other weird stuff that's going on around the city, all while this revolution's happening and this murder mystery is unfolding in this chapter. And Fubuki's thing is she's a fucking idiot. She is airheaded to an insane degree, but I give Xanthi credit because it's a bubbly sort of Haru-esque performance. I mean, she is using the Haru style of voice for this. But I think the funniest thing is aha! I remember! It's the number 4! And I remember seeing that, and I was just the look on her face is she's endlessly cheerful unless the plot demands that she's sad and for some reason. But she's just she can't count to 4. She's a bit dumb. Her family, it reminds me of Sonia Nevermind. That's essentially what they're going for. A very airheaded version of Sonia Nevermind, where Sonia was kind of snooty, but also very cheerful, but very unaware of how wealthy she was. Fubuki is just a complete idiot and does not know anything, forgets her wallet, forgets her money, forgets her stuff, is working a part-time job and forgetting that her job is to be a detective sometimes, and she keeps talking about being in an adventure. So Shinigami keeps calling her a sheltered skank. Anyway, but I mean, again, it's a fine chapter. It's not amazing, but it does start to wear a little bit. Chapter 4, character Vivia Twilight. This guy's interesting. So he's voiced by Alex Lee, who, funny enough, is going to be the main character of the Persona 3 remake, Persona 3 Reload. So imagine that. He goes, like, he's only been around for like 5 or some years. Now he gets to portray one of the biggest main characters of the upcoming year. Interesting thing. But anyway, Vivia, his whole thing is he sleeps in a chimney. He sleeps in a furnace. They don't, because the detective agency is kind of on a boat. And like a submarine kind of thing, off in a dock somewhere. His whole thing is he's very lanky. He's very melancholy. Not in a mean-spirited way, and not even like the most brooding sort of way. Sort of a comedic brooding. But it's not like he doesn't care. It's more that he's willing to care if the situation demands it, and he actually has to do something. So he's like the lethargic, brooding guy. His tagline is, "I wish I could die someday." And he says it exactly like that. So he sleeps in a furnace. Like in a hotel they have stationed in there, he'll sleep under the hotel in the lobby, and the people will stare at him like, why is he sleeping or reading a book under a piano? He just goes, well, I like it here. But he's willing to be like friendly. That's the thing. So when the situation demands it, he will actually be useful. His power is essentially astral projection. So you're able to flow through walls. You can't interact with people, but they can't see you. The big problem with that is his section comes in a lab where these weird spirits are involved. So you have to do like a weird fucked up forced stealth segment for a few minutes. And I'm like, God fucking damn it. You didn't need forced stealth. So you get through the forced stealth segment that's there. What the fuck? It's dumb. But Vivia's whole thing is he's kind of knowing that Shinigami exists. Nobody else is able to kind of see or sense that Yuma has been talking to himself or seeing things or talking to Shinigami. He can sort of sense it because he's trained in spectral projection. So he helps figure out this laboratory, because what happens is there's this rivalry between these two characters. You got Makoto Kagetsuchi, voiced by Brandon Winkler, and Yomi Hellsmile, voiced by Howard Wong. And Howard Wong was Whitley Schnee, Weiss's younger brother in Ruby. And as soon as I read that, I'm like, that explains why Yomi sounds like such a bitch. Because that's the same voice and everything. Anyway, so Yomi is the leader of the Peacekeepers. He has been the person sending dudes, whether it be detectives or high-ranking officials, after everybody in the same chapter, because he wants to rule Kanai Ward with an iron fist. The previous person who ruled Amaterasu Corporation gave up his position not to Yomi, who was leading the Peacekeepers, but to Makoto, this weird kid in a mask, and somebody who just knows everything about everything. So what goes on, the mystery is about 3 or 4 years ago, about how Makoto came in, figured something out, figured out what to do about it, and it pissed Yomi right off. So they have this tenuous, what the fuck are you doing here? You're pissing me off. So Yomi owns everything. He owns the security company. Makoto has control to a certain extent, but it's not great. That's why he really needs the detective's help to figure shit out. So the last couple of chapters are figuring out what is the relationship between Makoto and Yomi, and what are all the weird mysteries surrounding Kanai Ward and things like that. So there's a little bit of weirdness going along with the game, and I don't know if everything fits per se, but if you can get past, again, I don't want to give away like storyline thing, because if you're familiar with Danganronpa, you're familiar with shit hits the fan in the final chapters. They just do. Whether it's stuff or you can kind of sense is where the game's going to go. Again, it's very deliberate. The game is trying to tell you exactly what you need to know so that you can finish it. This is a visual novel. It's trying to be very deliberate. It doesn't always pan out, though, because the problems add up the more you do. The reasoning death matches and the Shinigami puzzles and things like that. They're competent gameplay. They're not very exciting. They're just trying to be something for you to do while you're doing the story bits or you're trying to learn investigations. I mean, it's not the worst mysteries in the world, but it is something that's there. Much like the Phoenix Wright and Danganronpa stuff, your main goal is to follow the story and remember things and not fuck up. But the game will tell you. It doesn't help that Yuma is a fucking wet fart of a main character for the most part. Later on, he starts to grow a bit of a backbone as he's more involved in the story. But God, you need Shinigami's help more than you think. Because this game is on Switch, there's a problem with a lot of the loading screens. It's slow going. It takes a while. Like, if they'd released this on the PS4 or, God forbid, PS5, I think it would have been a lot faster to get from the transition to the, to the meat of the matter to the reasoning death matches. It does take like 5 or 10 seconds to do each loading screen, which is a bit much, especially for a game that's lower budget. And again, the mini games are they're just kind of there. The deduction denouement doesn't need to exist because you're already doing the fort gimmick. You're just adding more, hey, do you remember what the whole storyline of this entire part of the section game was? Make sure you recognize it again because we're going to make you piece it together and retell it for you. I mean, yeah, Shinigami for the most part is the one doing the narration, but if you're playing it again, say to re-experience the story, and you have to go through that shit all over again, it could be annoying. So hopefully they patched it. I don't know if they have, but that's the thing. Still, though, what does the game do very well? I would say the fact that Shinigami exists, for one thing, is that, again, Monokuma owned Danganronpa. He was one of the reasons that the game worked, though they had so many other characters around him that it balanced out some of the tendencies. But again, it's the owning the scenery because the main characters are fucking bleh. Shinigami does the same thing here. She's there to balance out Yuma being stupid and being annoying because those kinds of protagonists suck. But not every protagonist can, own and choose scenery. So sometimes you need a balancing act as a secondary character. Thankfully, Shinigami's up to the task and she's lovable and it's fun. Sometimes overbearing, but only in the most extreme circumstances. If you are overbearing, try getting through Desahiko's chapter without getting annoyed every 5 seconds. It's a drinking game where you basically get shot by how many times he tries to hit on people. So you'll fall flat on your face if you try to drink every time he does that. It's not as bad with Shinigami. She is just always an ever-present thing. But she's funny, and it works. The city itself is a cool aesthetic. While you're wandering around doing side quests, like helping find somebody's thing, or providing information or listening to advice and surveys or doing other small mysteries to gain points and whatever, you can look at the city and go, okay, this looks kind of neat. It's very budgety, but the pinks and the yellows and the weird bloom effects kind of add to the ambiance, and it does have a world unto its own. It is its own isolated place that is fairly different from the Mystery Labyrinth, which also has its own vibe to it. It's very visually striking for a game that could have just been very dour. The mysteries are fine. The comedies are fine. Again, aside from Desahiko, who just doesn't shut the fuck up, there are good comedic moments to be had. And I think the characters are fine. It's a cool set of powers. Turning back time and spectral projection, and even some of the stuff in the early chapter, you get some cool ideas. Like the first chapter has some different characters, and the third chapter has some different characters. First being the intro sequence. Chapter 1 is its own thing with Halara, but the intro sequence introduces some people that have their own sets of powers. Then you have some people in the third thing that kind of introduce their own thing too. So it's going to the very Danganronpa-esque idea. And I think their skill sets are interesting enough, even though they've probably seen elsewhere in other games and other franchises and whatnot. The fact that the world can exist with them and not sound very awkward is a testament to how the game is presented. The Mystery Labyrinth idea itself is its own black box, and, is it a cardinal sin to be using that sort of power to basically stopping time, figuring out a mystery, and it's essentially bullet time on steroids, except at the end, somebody dies. It's pretty nuts. But another thing that I think is really good, and this is an underrated thing, especially for, this is maybe something only I would really care about. It's fully voice acted, and the voice acting is really good, but it autoplays everything. I've recently replayed Dragon Quest XI, and I constantly have to press the button after every line of dialogue, rather than, I can set the controller down and let the game play and then only get involved when I need to. It seems like it doesn't add up, but I've said before that I've been dealing with wrist issues and, neck issues and whatever by sitting in chairs or playing games when I'm getting into my 40s and whatnot. If you have issues holding a controller, if you have issues playing like fast twitch games like a Nier Automata or something like that, where there's a lot of button presses or something, or a hack and slash game, this is very low effort on the player's part. You can kind of let the game play itself and be engaged only when you have to, and mostly the game as a story will play itself out, and you just have to pay attention to the story at large. There's something freeing about a game like that, especially if you're in a situation where you can't press buttons or can't hold a controller for very long. You can set the controller down, let the game play, and then when you get to a gameplay segment, the story's done and you can get involved. So don't let that deter you. If that's not the style of game you're looking for, then maybe it's not for you. Again, it's not everybody's cup of tea. It is a budget anime niche title from guys who've made that sort of thing. But again, much like the Somnium Files, the guys who made this have learned lessons from the games they've made before and have made strides to change it, change the formula just enough to be a different sort of thing. But it has all the hallmarks of the Danganronpa games from before, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed playing it. I enjoyed watching it and, learning about the story before even playing it on Twitch. So I want more of this. There are things that they could improve on, of course, but this is the sort of game that needs to exist because these sorts of games don't exist, and there's a market for these things if you're willing to find it. And I'm glad that for a small bit, I think people are liking this and are buying the games, and I think there needs to be more of these, provided that, this sort of thing succeeds. So again, would I recommend Master Detective Archives Raincode? Yes. If you've played Danganronpa and want more of that, you get more of that in a different way. I want this to continue, and I think it will succeed eventually, and if it already hasn't. But that will do it for me, and let's see what we're doing next. We've got Helpful Fox Senko-san. Absolutely, yes, I can't wait to talk about this one. Breathfire 2, Rumbling Hearts, Donkey Kong Country 2, and I believe some other games here and there in between a couple of anime that I think, I want to say is Tenchi and Lupin the Third, the Fujiko spinoff. I'll have to look up that schedule and make sure I'm proper on that, but I've got quite a few games and anime lined up, in advance, so I've got this set up. But that will do it for me, and I'll see you guys next time. Citizen Strife, signing off.